Hey there, friends and enemies. JoPaWrites here once again, and today I've got a brand new writer's thoughts for you. This is the podcast where we talk about all your favorite gaming, geeky, streaming, video game, superhero news that you love, and so do I. And I'm just going to jump into it. No guests this week. We're actually doing a solo cast as we've got a lot to talk about, and I wanted to dive into it pretty deeply. Now, one of the games that I've been playing a absolute ton of since the release is Outriders. If you haven't played it, it is a third-person shooter with looter elements. It's got no ongoing live service type of events, so it's a standalone campaign that is better than I would think most people would have expected, as well as some end game, some looting, some farming, all that kind of good stuff. I've seen a lot of people compare it to Destiny. If you're going to call it the Destiny killer, get that out of your mind right now, because this is the type of game that will be fun in stretches when they release new content, but they're not going to have the continuous updates that something like Destiny has, and that's not a bad thing. So a lot of people are going to be a little upset about that. They're going to get a month in. They've grinded to tier 15 on the expeditions. They've done all the missions 100 times. They've gone through the campaign on all 4 characters, and they're going to look around and be like, well, what's next? And it's like, you just wait for the next expansion. That's how it goes. And they probably won't be happy about it. They'll take a step back. They'll go back to Destiny and realize how good Destiny still can be. But, yeah, I'm not surprised, or I won't be surprised when that happens. And that's just the way this game is built. What's going to happen, like something like Borderlands or maybe The Division, when new DLC drops, you'll have a bunch of people come back. They'll probably raise the cap on how high your gear can be. Everyone will race to get their gear higher, which in this game is a little bit easier because you can bring your gear up through leveling and using resources. But yeah, I think overall it's going to be interesting to see how this game performs going forward, because it's been nothing but a massive success at this point, right? The Steam numbers are huge, obviously on various consoles. It's had its struggles with some glitches, some matchmaking issues, etc. And I'm going to jump into all of that at some point. But overall, the launch, as far as sales and everything, has probably exceeded expectations. The amount of players I see on either Twitch or on Twitter talking about the game is pretty high, and I think that bodes well for the future. Now, games like this, you hope that there's DLC lined up, but there may not have been much depending on where they want to go. And so that's a big question. So People Can Fly is not a huge studio like you might see from Gearbox with Borderlands, so they don't have the same amount of resources to have their DLC lined up basically before their game goes live, because they know how successful the game is going to be. So luckily, People Can Fly has Square Enix behind them, and it sounds like they're going to be producing DLC because of or expansions, whatever, because of the success of the game. That being said, who knows how long that's going to be. But like I said, after a month, we're going to see a lot of the hardcore players start to dip on this game, because it's a cycle that, while repeatable, is not endless, right? And you don't have the type of difficult co-op challenges like raids that keeps Destiny going, or the ongoing content that keeps Destiny going and people invested at a ongoing clip. Now, I'm taking a step back. We're going to dive into all the things that I liked about Outriders, all the things that I didn't like about Outriders, some of the changes that are upcoming with their patches, their nerfs, their updates, and what I would personally like to see from the game going forward. Now, kicking it off, like I said earlier, the campaign was better than I would have expected. It's funny and gritty in ways, but not like outlandish like Borderlands. So I really enjoyed it for what it was. I thought it was a solid sci-fi, post-apocalyptic type of storytelling, and there were enough twists and turns to keep me fully invested. The game is also not afraid to knock off certain characters, so it's one of those where you don't feel so attached. Even some of the vendors, which was interesting to me, and this is going to have spoilers, minor, I'm not going to name names or whatever, but as you progress through the story, the people in your party, in your camp, who you think are set in stone, actually does rotate, which is good because it keeps the immersion. I was worried that as you got to the late game, there were certain characters that were untouchable because of they were vendors or they were a part of your party, and that is not the case, which is really, really nice. I enjoyed that, and I think it does add a bit of extra layer there because you'll think somebody is safe and ultimately find out that's not necessarily the case. So that was good. End boss was solid, although I was hopeful for more of a giant monster type of end boss, if I'm being honest. Like bigger than we might have seen throughout the campaign, but that's a minor quibble and not something I'm going to be too pressed about. Other than that, like I said, the campaign was solid, better than I expected, longer than I expected as well. I kept thinking that it was going to be cut short, and we've seen that from other campaigns of other games in the past, so I'm glad that that was not the case. Gameplay-wise, a lot of people are not fans of third person. I think it was fine. It takes a little bit of time to get used to, especially if you're going back and forth with first-person shooters like a Destiny or a COD or something like that. It does take time. The sniper rifles, I feel like, are the one place where when they hit, they feel fantastic, but oftentimes are not hitting regularly. I feel like I'm aimed, I got the reticle right on the head of the enemy, and it doesn't connect. So that's one thing that I would say is a little bit frustrating with that. And yeah, I don't know. I think all the other gameplay is fine. You are thinking that you need to use cover early and often, but that's not actually the case. That's not something you want to do a lot. I actually, on my YouTube channel, I've done a tips and tricks video where I talk about all of that. I've also shown some side missions to get free legendaries. So I think I'm not going to dive too deeply into that at this point, but just touching on it briefly, you want to play the game aggressively depending on your character. So all the characters feel very different. That's one of the things that, for all the flack that it gets, Avengers got really right, and I'm glad Outriders gets right as well. If you're going to have a game like this, your characters have to feel unique. With Destiny, with other games, especially if they're based mostly around gunplay, your character is going to be supplementary and not going to be as drastic a difference when you change from one character to the other. Whereas the way healing works and the way the perks work on your different characters, you're going to play very different between your Trickster, between your Pyromancer, Technomancer. The only two that are relatively similar, especially in the weapons that you want to rock and all that kind of good stuff, because they are such close range, are going to be Devastator and Trickster. But even then, the Trickster is quick and able to slay out really fast, whereas the Devastator is a little bit more tanky, depending on your build. So that's the second part I really wanted to touch on, and this is where the developers have said that they took a lot of inspiration from Diablo, and you can really see that in the skill trees, in the build potential, in the mod factors from weapons and armor. You've got armor sets where you get set bonuses, although at this point they're not super effective, especially in the end game, but there's a lot of potential there to mix and match mods to get the perfect build that you are excited for. And that has me super stoked because you can experiment for days in this game, and that's something you can't say in a lot of other games, especially, like I said, if it's a shooter primary game. The question is going to be how many of these builds are actually going to be viable in the end game, the expeditions. So right now, expeditions are the only end game. You have to speed run through to get a gold reward, which means a better shot at the legendary. And some of the builds are fun, but they're just not viable at this point. And this is going to be even further proven when the patch releases next week, because we're going to see some of the builds that people have been mowing through content actually getting a bit of a nerf. So I'm going to get in deep with the debate of nerfs versus buffs and why some are good, some are bad. But I do think it's good that the developers have reacted and implemented a patch within like a little over a week. That shows that they're working quickly, working hard. They also said that their team that's doing weapon balancing and updates as far as abilities is different from their bug and patch fixing team. So that's good. So they're not going to be completely separate there. And yeah, I think overall we're seeing them react quickly, which is necessary in a game like this that they want to implement buffs, nerfs, everything like that. Other than that, as far as gameplay goes, the game feels like a lot of fun. If you enjoy that type, third-person shooters. Ability focused, but not too overpowered, I think, because one of the things that definitely drew people in was just how, especially if you're playing solo, just how challenging the game can be at times, especially if you keep it at your maximum world tier. A lot of folks, especially going through campaigns, will expect the game to be relatively easy in a game like this, and that was definitely not the case. A lot of times you would get hung up. You might even have to drop down your world tier in order to beat a certain section. So that was very interesting to me. I do worry, like I said, about the longevity of the game, because there is no raid, there's no dungeon, there's no activity other than just mob hoarding, fighting. Some of the expeditions are interesting and fun, but again, those are more akin to Destiny strikes than they are any kind of deep, layered, complex content. You know what I'm saying? So because of that, there's no real mechanics besides maybe holding a point. I just don't see it holding up long term as well as other games that produce ongoing content. And it'll be interesting to see, because you have games like Borderlands, which just introduced like a raid activity recently, and has had other endgame type as well. But that game succeeds because of the fan base, the over-the-top nature of it, and people loving to farm for the perfect role. That's the end game in Borderlands. And it'll be interesting to see in Outriders if that's the case, because you can interchange mods so much that I feel like people are going to have the builds that they mostly want quicker than you would in other games with much smaller drop chances. Now, moving on, another similarity this game had to Borderlands, which was interesting, is matchmaking issues. Co-op matchmaking and co-op gameplay has been rough. And that's unfortunate, because that's where a lot of people want to play this game. They want to play it as a co-op shooter. It's very fun solo. I would recommend, if you like a challenge, going through it solo and seeing how you enjoy it. But if you just want to go through and play the game and enjoy it with buds, unfortunately, there was a lot of issues. Because of the peer-to-peer connection, I believe is what they're using, there was a lot of crashing. Like, every time we would leave a party, PlayStation or our system would crash. It would be super laggy a lot. Even when I know it's not the internet, it'd be the connections would just not be great. There's also a lot more tendency for glitches and stuff like that when you're in multiplayer as well. So it was unfortunately very frustrating at times if you were playing multiplayer to go through and have all these problems popping up. Now, server issues, all of that stuff is going to happen with a game. This is one where I'm surprised that it's always online a little bit, but I'm not, because they want to keep the playing field level for folks and not have them, like, if you don't have it always online, if they institute a patch, someone could just not update and play the game offline and continue pre-patch. So I think the way this game works, always online, kind of makes sense, but it's still weird for a non live service game to be always online like that. And I know that's caused some frustration, and it's also caused some issues with the patches and the glitches and all that stuff. Other than that, I haven't had it be too problematic with the errors and whatnot. I haven't been kicked too often from the game. So my experience might be different from other folks, and I know they've got a lot of patches, a lot of bug fixes incoming, so that's really, really good. Now, I will say the end game matchmaking absolutely needs work. Couple reasons. One, when you matchmake with someone who's doing expeditions, they might not be doing expeditions. Destiny has this right where you can turn on matchmaking and it'll search for players and you all load into the activity together. That is fantastic. It works really well for like strikes and stuff like that. The problem with the way Outriders does it is that you will load into a player's world, right? And they might not be on expeditions. They might be on that quest step, but they're not doing expeditions. They're doing hunts or something like that. I've had that happen numerous times, and it absolutely needs to be addressed. You can also make with people, and they'll just kick you right away, right? Because it's one player's, the host. Not only can they kick you, they can kick you all the way up until you get your loot. So you could do all the hard work with them and then just get kicked. I have had friends complain about that online, and it's something that absolutely needs to be addressed as well. Maybe players are locked in until the team wipes. Maybe players are locked in until they leave that instance. I don't know what the case is, but Outriders absolutely needs to fix their matchmaking problems, because one of the biggest frustrations I've had with games like Borderlands is that they're so not friendly when it comes to the co-op experience. And this is a game I want to enjoy with buds at times, and they make it near impossible when you have to deal with all these hurdles. And if you want to play with randoms, if you don't want to play solo or grind solo, it's got so many hurdles to cross that just make it impossible. Like, for example, if I'm streaming, I don't want to wait 25 minutes bouncing in and out of games to find the right crew to farm expeditions, and then maybe after 2 they're done, you know? So for me, that's one of the biggest problems. It's one place I really hope they look at going forward, and it's one of the places that I think before any type of additional endgame is implemented, that they've completely overhauled that system to make it more user-friendly. So that's my thoughts, my little rant on the matchmaking and co-op experience. Now, let's talk a little bit about my favorite classes. So I was all in on the Trickster and the demo, and it's still a lot of fun. I really do enjoy it. However, since I started playing Pyromancer, that is my baby, and that has been my main. I do think the game does a great job, like I said earlier, of making all the characters feel unique, and you have a play style for everybody. Trickster is a classic rogue, dive in, create chaos, jump out, in, out of danger, right? Whereas Devastator is the tank character in front lines, destroying things up front. Pyromancer is like mid-range wizard and sorcerer kind of thing, spell casting, fire, all that kind of good stuff. Technomancer is your long range support abilities, or you've got your turrets and stuff. I do think that the best thing about that, the varying classes, is that all of the weapons are viable depending on what class you're running. I do not want to be a trickster or a devastator running a sniper rifle. I just don't. Whereas on a technomancer, it definitely comes in handy, and I do like running a sniper on that character. So that's where I think playstyles can be very different, but you can really adjust like what weapons you want to use, what abilities you're using from character to character, and your whole playstyle has to change. I think that's very interesting because I've heard people say, I don't like this character. And the reason is they're used to playing this one specific way. And then now the Outriders is making them completely shift that and play a different type of game in order to get the healing bonuses, in order to get shields, in order to maximize their effectiveness. So I think that's really good. And I think that's the best part of Outriders at this point, in my opinion. Now, we're going to get into a little bit of a rant here about nerfs and buffs and why games cannot just buff things infinitely. So I see it online all the time, and I do think that there's a balance, right? Everyone remembers the nerfs. They always forget about the buffs. However, when Outriders released their first patch notes, there was mostly only nerfs. So that, I think, is bad optics, right? You always want to bring some things up a little bit if you're going to be nerfing other things, just so it feels like you're not just hammering things that are overperforming, you know? So I think there's some bad optics to that. However, everyone's saying, oh, well, this is a PvE only game. Why are you nerfing things? Well, part of what a lot of players have enjoyed is the challenge, right? So not everyone loves the challenge, but you do want to present some type of challenge to your players, especially once you get towards Expedition level 15, right? So if it's before that, yeah, maybe you're overperforming, you're doing very well with a certain build, but you don't want to over buff. You don't want power creep to be too much of an issue, because what ultimately happens there is now everyone's coasting through content and then they're done with it. They get everything they want right away. They get all the things that they're looking for, and they just leave the game, right? So that's one of the things I feel like people don't understand, and it's hard because a weekend, not everybody has finished everything. Not everybody is on Expedition 15. Not everyone has even finished the campaign, and their favorite power ability is getting nerfed. And that's frustrating, I'm sure. But looking through the guides on YouTube or the posts from folks on Twitter on them just absolutely coasting through Expedition level 15, I can understand why People Can Fly is nerfing these certain builds, right? That being said, again, they should have buffed some things with that in order to balance it out, right? And if something is underperforming, you want to bring it up. We see this in Destiny a lot, and folks always blame it on PvP, but that's not always the case. You want the game to be fun. You want power fantasy. You want all that kind of good stuff. But at the end of the day, you do want a little bit of a challenge. If you're just, like, if you can use a build and just walk through the entire game, what are you trying to get next? What do you need from the game now that you've coasted through it, you know? That's the one thing I feel like people don't look at is ultimately, these companies, whether it's an ongoing live service game or a game like Outriders, they want you to replay their content, right? That's one of their main goals. If you are going to be playing the game and coasting through everything, you're eventually going to move on. And everyone will move on eventually anyway, but you're going to do so much faster. Because, and this is one of the things that always frustrates me within Destiny, the community, and they're like, oh, you're nerfing my favorite thing that I grinded for. But you probably used it for 6 months, and now you stopped grinding because you have your favorite thing. So Bungie wants you to look for your new favorite thing. And that's the way these games should work. And that's the way these games should be, because if you're going to still be playing it, you need something else out there that is going to make you feel good when you finally have it drop. And if everything is overbuffed, or if a couple things are overbuffed, once you have that certain thing lined up, whether it's a build, whether it's a certain weapon, whether it's a certain ability, what's the point in anything else? And that's where I will sit back and I'll look at folks and be like, I don't know why you will look at this and not understand how that's a difficult balance to strike. Everyone loves to complain, oh, they're going to ruin their game, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. And it's a necessary evil in these type of games. And not understanding that is going to cause you more frustration than it necessary, because it's going to keep happening. And it's happened in Borderlands, which is also a game that's PvE only. And the reason for that is they just want people to enjoy their game, but not walk through it without a challenge. Because I don't think that's fun for a lot of people, especially once you get past the campaign. The campaign, put it on easy mode. Enjoy the campaign at your own pace. If you really just want to enjoy the campaign of Outriders, you can set it to World Tier 1 and coast your way through it. You're not going to get very good drops. You're not going to get legendaries or anything like that. But you can do it, and you can probably enjoy it, just if you want the campaign. But if you want a challenge, there are ways right now to avoid making the game any kind of challenge, especially on certain characters. That's the other problem that we're seeing. And this leads into problem 2, right? If you're a Devastator or a Pyromancer main right now, you might be getting kicked when you join in on expeditions because your character just isn't powerful enough. And especially at the high level 15 expeditions, a lot of people are looking at certain characters, certain builds only. Otherwise, you're not viable, right? And now, that's not always going to be fair. Yes, they need to buff some things in conjunction with some of the nerfs. But if these folks just want to farm on easy mode, they just want other tricksters or technomancers who are really, really strong to coast through these things as fast as possible. Leveling that playing field is absolutely necessary, and it's something that I don't think folks fully grasp when they're looking at these buffs and nerfs. They have a knee-jerk emotional reaction to being like, this is my favorite thing, and now you are taking it from me, so I'm going to be mad. Instead of stepping back and looking at objective and be like, yeah, this was kind of busted. I was using it a lot. It was making the game so easy. I really just didn't have much of a challenge. So I think that's something that I wish more folks would understand. And I do think it's also on developers. Like, we've seen some of them start to get better about the communication to tell its fan base why. This is why we're doing it. You may not like it always, but this is the why and the reason that we're making these changes, because at the back end, there's this is our philosophy, And without that, I do think it makes it a little hard. There's a lot of guessing game, but yeah, ultimately, I think that's where I stand on Outriders. I am very excited to play more of it, to go through more of the different characters. I cannot wait to see what they do with some of their DLC, and I hope their vision is huge, right? I hope they have plans for a raid, for end game content, in addition to expeditions, and this is where, having played Avengers a lot, having played Borderlands a lot, I look at those games and I'm like, what? I came back for the DLC. I come back when they have a different update, right? An expansion, something like that. Same thing with the Division. But unfortunately, a lot of times, unless they have a meaty end game or something like that, you'll come back for the expansion, be around for a couple days, and then you're back off the game. So that should be, in my opinion, the number one focus of Outriders going forward. Story-based DLC with additional endgame content, 100%. And if they're able to pull that off, I think I'll keep diving into Outriders every time it comes back, and I'll spend a couple weeks in it. I'll enjoy my time, and then I'll play my other ongoing games or Genshin Impact or something like that to buy the time for the next expansion. So that's my thoughts on Outriders, and yeah, overall, I'm really digging the game. I'm not going to give it a number rating or anything like that, but I think it's a quality game and exactly the type of thing that released in the perfect window for everyone to jump in and enjoy it without a lot of competition. So, job well done to People Can Fly and Square Enix, and no, not an ad. I did not get a key for this. So, moving on, I did want to touch on a similar thing with Destiny. So, Destiny is getting some nerfs they haven't announced the buffs yet, but they're getting some nerfs to Quick Draw. They're getting it removed from Astral and Fellwinter's Lie. They are nerfing Bastion in PvP, but buffing it in PvE, which I think is a good idea. They're nerfing swords. I know I saw people upset about that. Overall, if you know me, if you watch any of my content, you know I'm a fan of variety, right? I use different loadouts pretty constantly. I'm tinkering with builds. I'm playing different games. I do not understand the people. Oh, they're also nerfing 120s. I do not understand people who want one meta, one type of gun to be dominant all the time. I don't understand people who just use one gun outside of maybe trials, one loadout, one skill tree all the time, right? It doesn't make sense to me. It's something I've never understood. And I think that's why I'm more amenable to updates and changes. And I don't get too bent out of shape because at the end of the day, a new meta is good, right? Not every meta is going to be your favorite. Not every meta is going to be great. As someone who loves sidearms, I am very excited to not have to deal with quick draw shotguns that have wild consistency, wild range at this point. I personally love it. I know there are reasons why people are not thrilled by it, and there are folks who can definitely use quick draw to raise the skill gap, but at the end of the day, those people are going to find ways to have success one way or another. Those people are going to raise the skill gap through their movement, through a different weapon. So I'm not real concerned about those folks' complaints or being upset, just because I think the majority of them are ones who have had success for the lifespan of Destiny and will continue to have success, but they'll be upset whenever their favorite thing is kind of tinkered with or changed. Other than that, the TWAB was good. I'm excited for Guardian games. I really wanted to say that the cadence this season of Destiny, Season of the Chosen, was amazing. A lot of it front end and action packed. storyline, all that kind of good stuff. We got strikes, we got all that kind of good new content. But now we're starting to see the slowdown at a perfect time because I can play Outriders. I can dive into other games. We had other updates coming, so it's kind of worked out really well. We still do have Guardian games, maybe one other surprise up the sleeve, but overall, I think Destiny is a really good spot. And every time I hear the words Destiny Killer, I will laugh hysterically. I can't help but think it's just going to be an endless cycle of people saying that Destiny is going to be killed off, or people are going to move on permanently from Destiny to these other games. And unless another first-person MMO looter shooter comes out that has PvP that can be supported on the same kind of ongoing cadence as Destiny, it's never going to be dethroned until it stops having content made for it. It's just impossible. You can't look at something like The Division and compare them, because Destiny has power fantasy. It has its raids are in shooter world are second to none. It's got a lot of benefits. It's been doing this for so long. They got the cadence right. They understand how to make ongoing content, and whether you complain about it or not, folks keep coming back on a regular basis, right? PvP can go up and down. It's got its problems, it's got its positives, but ultimately, it's been around for this long because it does a lot of things well. It is super successful in the grand scheme of things, and nothing is going to kill it off until it goes away. That's just the bottom line. So anyone uttering those phrases, I think you're never going to be satisfied if you think something else is going to replace Destiny. And if you are not enjoying Destiny, I would highly recommend going and playing a bunch of other games for a while. Maybe you'll find a different one that satisfies other itches as well. But you're going to look back at Destiny and have a whole new outlook on it, because you're going to understand that while it's got its flaws and its faults, it does so many things well that go underappreciated. And that's just the way it is. Some games are going to be like that, and especially ones that have been out for this long. You look at MMOs, folks have been trying to kill off World of Warcraft forever, but there's just a big market for MMOs, so you still have stuff like Final Fantasy Online. You got Elder Scrolls Online and stuff like that. Other major MMOs. So there's always going to be new ones in that space. But like the looter shooter space, we've seen Anthem come and go. We've seen Fallout 76 is still around, but it's got a dedicated fan base, but it's just doing its thing. Division. We've got Borderlands. We've got Warframe. So none of those have been able to really put a dent into Destiny, and that's going to continue to be the case unless something comes out that's similar enough to compare, but drastically improved. And I don't know if anyone has that formula, that patience, or that time at this point. So that's just how it is, and that Destiny killer is not right around the corner, unfortunately, for you folks who constantly love to comment dead game on all the Bungie posts. And now I wanted to get into something a little bit, sorry about that, a little bit different. Now, this is going to be interesting because I'm not going to try to get into too many spoilers, but I wanted to talk about why most people will never be satisfied by the ending of their favorite show. And now, if you don't know, this is not tied to a show, actually, what triggered this conversation, but a manga. So Attack on Titan is ending, and I'm seeing a lot of complaints about the way that it's ending. And it gave me a lot of flashbacks to Game of Thrones, but even before that, to Dexter, to The Sopranos to Lost. A lot of these shows have struggled with this, right? And I think it's just, it comes down to a couple different things. Expectations, right? It comes down to shows sticking around for longer than they probably should, or not sticking around for long enough because of contracts or TV relationships, as far as like how long actors are going to stick with one specific show. And so ultimately what ends up happening is some of the favorites leave, or they don't have enough time left on their contract, and guess what's going to happen? They're going to rush to complete storylines that should have taken a couple seasons or a bunch of episodes and compact them down because they want everything told, the story to be finished, but they just don't have the time to do it. And now you look at something like Game of Thrones, and I feel like that's one specifically where the writers wanted to finish up quickly. They had the heads of that. They wanted to wrap up season 8, and they rushed through a lot of things, and it made for a disappointing final season. You look at Sopranos, they wanted to have questions. Here's one of the major problems, right? Sometimes you get the end of a show, and you don't know if you want to leave the opportunity out there for more of that show, for potential sequels, spin-offs, additional seasons, all of that kind of good stuff. So you look at something like Dexter, and Dexter would have been better off a few seasons shorter because it kind of ran out of stories to tell, and it hit its heights, right? But then once you lose certain characters, or they're killed off, or whatever the case may be, it definitely impacts how the show works. And at some point you go through so many of the same scenarios that you just can't possibly go any further, or you start to have that power creep thing that we see in a lot of anime. Naruto, for example, is a perfect example of that. You go from these kids, and even the adults early on in this series are strong, but by the end, they're god tier. And now you get into Boruto, which is the sequel featuring his son, and everyone is like super powered, like crazy strong. Now, it sounds like they're going to nerf that going forward, but at some point, it's too little too late, you know? You can only make everything be so far strong. Dragon Ball Z is the perfect example of that. There's always an additional power level. Going back to Dexter, what we saw is that the stories were so good, and then what ended up ultimately happening is that you lost a little bit of the heart when some of the characters left, and then you just struggled to replace that while also trying to top previous stories. And that's just not possible. The key is to try to tell the similar stories in different ways to keep folks on their toes. But over the course of like 8 seasons or whatever the case may be, that's always going to be difficult. And a lot of that also comes down to the nemesis of the main character. If you have a good nemesis, if you have a good villain, if you have a good anti-hero, whatever the case may be, it makes the show that much better. You look at a show like Daredevil, Wilson Fisk was so great of a opponent in that show. It made and so relatable that it made the show 1,000 times better, you know. So ultimately, I just wanted to touch on that because there's so many shows that I've seen endlessly criticized for their final season, their final couple seasons, their finale. And I think that's just going to be the way that it works in times, because you set yourself up with these expectations. You've been looking for the show week after week after week for so long, and they've told all these wonderful stories, that as it starts to wrap up, it's never going to be as satisfying as you imagine in your head. People come up with these theories or these ideas, and they're like, well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? And we see this in gaming as well, unfortunately. Whereas folks get so overexcited about potential ideas and their own, like, oh, this is where the story is going to go. This is what we can do with it. This is this is that, and this is the other thing. That when it doesn't pan out as they kind of expected it to, it's a bit of a letdown. And unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. That's something that we see in every medium. I think that's something we'll always see. And yeah, that's about it on that. I hope folks eventually realize that as long as the writer, director, the actors, as long as they are telling their story in the way that they want them to be told, the final finale, the final season, whatever the case may be, is a success. And not everyone's going to enjoy it, but that doesn't mean it's bad necessarily. It just means it's not what you hoped it would be. Now, some of them objectively are worse than others, especially when you look at factors like being rushed and whatnot. But the story is what the story is. And a lot of times they had these ideas in place for the finale long before they got to that point. And your favorite writer, your favorite director, didn't just become a bad writer or director or producer just because you don't like the finale, even though you enjoyed everything up until that point. You know, they didn't complete the story as you would have liked, but you can still look back fondly on the show, the manga, the book series, whatever the case may be, and say, okay, this has brought me a lot of joy. I really enjoyed this, and I might not have liked the end, but it is what it is at the end of the day. So that's just my thoughts on it. I wanted to touch on that because I know that's a big talking point going around with a lot of stories and a lot on Attack on Titan, like I said. I won't get into any spoilers on that, but I hope you enjoy the finale of that, the finale of the manga, and then next year the finale of the anime. And yeah, I hope your favorite show does not disappoint you going forward. Anyway, my name is JoPaWrites. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, heart, whatever the case may be on your favorite platform, because we are on a wide range of them. So support the podcast if you can. But other than that, I hope you have a great day, and I'll catch you all later.